Hey everybody, welcome to Earth and Time, a channel where we explore human and Earth history and most often where the two intersect. And today we're going to talk about one of those places where the two intersect. I'm actually in Tomball, Texas, known as Oil City, USA, because of that intersection of the folks here finding oil and creating this boom town. So join me today. Let's learn about Tomball, Texas, a town that also made Ripley's, believe it or not. So let's get to it. I'm starting my adventure today and our learning today actually at the Tomball Historic Museum, and what they have here is a series of homes that you can go tour, and they're open a few days a week. I believe it's Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday, and learn a little bit about life here in Tomball, Texas. And you'll see right away they have things here about the Pelot family, and that's a Frenchman, Claude Nicolas Pelot, came to this area in 1837, and his son Eugene worked in the timber business here. And so a town was already set up here in the 1800s, and originally was called Peck. And eventually its name would be changed to, the gentleman you see here, his name is Thomas Henry Ball, or Tomball. And so they actually named the city after him and dedicated it to him because of all the work he did with bringing the train in here and helping develop this part of Texas. Now, he was also, I believe, a U.S. congressman for the state of Texas as well. Let's go head into the museum and see what we can learn about this town. And more specifically, I'm really interested in the geologic story here, the story about the oil field and the oil that was found here in 1933. So as I'm heading in, it says there's no photos here, so I'm probably not going to be able to film inside, but at least I can tell you a little bit about what I learned and talk about it from the outside of this building. And this is actually the Griffin Memorial House. And this was actually moved into this area. It was a home for this family from 1920 to 1965. I just finished walking through the house, and it's neat seeing how an affluent family would have lived. And this is a beautiful home on the inside, definitely worth walking around and taking a look at. They had things like the old beds that had ropes, you know, instead of box springs or the lower sections of beds we have today. They actually use ropes to put the mattresses on. And actually that's where the idea of sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite, the idea that you kept your ropes tight that your mattress was on so you wouldn't sink through the floor or fall through. Really neat to check out that old house. Let's see what else we can learn about. Looking through the back section of this museum is where they actually have an old oil house. You'll see what's known as a Christmas tree here. I'm going to see if I can find some more information actually about the Tomball oil field. And it sounds like from talking to one of the docents here, maybe they don't have a lot here on site, so we'll have to do some extra research along the way together and see what we can learn. So here's an old Tomball gasoline pump. Check that thing out, from the 1930s. And they'd fill the gasoline up here so they know how much they had, and then I guess you'd pump it down. I've actually never seen one of these working before. If anybody else has, please let me know down below. I'm fascinated by this, and I love old memorabilia and old Americana and old oil field history. And speaking of that oil field history, the very first well that was the discovery well for the Tomball oil and gas field was known as the JFW Cobb's well number 1, and you'll see it was drilled of May 1933 and actually produced oil and gas all the way to June 1980. That's a pretty significant period of time, almost 50 years. And out of that, they got almost 280,000 barrels of oil and 550,000 million cubic feet of gas. Pretty outstanding for a well drilled in 1933. Now, the original well site is a little ways away from here, and I'll see if we can go visit that and take a look at where that site's actually at. I believe it's actually in the middle of town, which we can talk a little bit about the story of the oil discoveries in town as well, and how that led to this town getting into Ripley's, believe it or not. Sitting in front of this pump jack and this old drilling rig here, and it looks like there's one you could actually tow and drill from. Not sure how deep they could go, probably not as deep as maybe they needed to in some of these places, but pretty interesting to see the old rig back there, and of course the pump jack right over my shoulder. Why did Tomball end up in Ripley's, believe it or not? Well, it turns out that the oil companies that came in here, Tomball Oil, made a deal with the citizens of the town of Tomball that they would supply them with free natural gas as well as free water for 90 years if they give them permission to drill within city limits, which of course the folks said, yes, we'll do that. And why it became important for Ripley's is that it turns out that they didn't have a cemetery, but they had free gas and free water. And Ripley's, believe it or not, thought it was worth the story of, wow, can you believe this? A town without even a cemetery gets those two things because they signed a deal with the oil and gas companies. Thought that was a really interesting story, an interesting tie to Ripley's, believe it or not, and the city of Tomball. So probably no secret why it became known as Oil City, USA. When they had that discovery in 1933, much like the gold rushes out in the western US and places like the California Gold Rush or the Colorado or the Alaskan Gold Rush, as soon as there's some precious material found or commodity found, people come from all over to try to make their fortunes, either trying to find it themselves or to work the fields because they needed workers to do that. And so people can make a living. So this became known as Oil City, USA. And it went from a small, basically agricultural train town to this mega oil boom city where thousands of people flocked into this area to try to find jobs, to try to make their riches here, looking for that black gold. And based on the sign we saw earlier, people definitely made some fortunes out here. This is what's known as a Christmas tree. It's basically a preventer for blowouts. So if everybody remembers the pictures of the big gushers coming out of the oil derricks, you know, going exploding way up in the air. They invented technology that would help control that. So as they drilled, they wouldn't lose all that oil or gas and keep things from happening like the blowout that happened up in Conroe. At Crater Lake, which I covered and I'll link up above here, you can check out that video on the Crater Lake disaster and the oil field there in Conroe, Texas. Which Conroe, Texas isn't incredibly far from here, probably 30, 40 miles from here or so. And it was another one of these big boom towns that started in the early 1930s. Here's another Christmas tree for you. One of the things that's really special about Tomball, Texas, and actually the Tomball oil field, is that it was the first time that what was known as geophysics was used successfully, and it actually ended up opening up that field, and now is how most oil and gas companies find those things, oil and gas, is by using geophysics. But Tomball, Texas was the first real test of how to use that technology, and they were successful. I have to say, this is one of the most beautiful little parks just to walk around. I am bummed they don't have the houses open, but apparently you need to schedule a tour. And if you do the tour, you can go in a bunch of the houses. They did have the one house open, the Griffin House, because that's more or less where the workers reside in. That's their headquarters. And so you can go, it sounds like maybe you can go in there, but all these other houses, including the old Lutheran church here, you have to come back and get tours for. I'll see if I can schedule us for a tour on another day. And here's the other side of that church. And the sign here that says it was established May 20th, 1876. And it's a Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church. It's quite a beautiful structure. Okay, from here, we've now talked a little bit about the history, how the town got its name, a little bit about why it was in Ripley's, believe it or not, and why it's known as Oil Town, USA. Let's go see if we can find that original well, which I believe isn't too far from here down the street. So we'll go take a look at that and reconvene there. All right, so we moved down the road and we're on the corner of what's known as Commerce and Cherry. And from what I read and what I remember from being here before, the actual #1 site, that JFW Cobbs, was actually, I thought the marker was right here, and it looks like there used to be something here and it's now gone. In fact, I think the sign we saw at the museum used to reside right here, and I believe this is where that initial well site was, or where the discovery well was right in this area. However, somebody can please correct me if I'm wrong and let me know where the original discovery site is. I'd love to go visit that at some point. But the marker brought me here. So if anybody has more information, let me know. So the idea of this being Oil City and the oil and gas industry here is so prominent that even in the park here, they have this derrick with some water coming out. Really cool sculpture, and really getting back at this idea of Tomball being Oil City, USA. Nice view looking at some of the heart of Tomball, if you will. So Main Street is just over in that direction, but there's a bunch of restaurants in here and shops. And the old theater, we're on the back side of it. And as I rotate around, what I want to show is the train depot, and including a little caboose over there. Welcome to the Tomball train depot. Now, before oil and gas were discovered here, this was actually an agricultural center and a train center. And it was such a main stop that they actually had what they called a roundhouse that could have up to 5 engines in it. And they had a water steam tower here, and this was a major train depot between sites to the north all the way down to Galveston, which of course in the 1800s, all the way up until the Great Hurricane 1900, was really the largest city, or one of the largest cities in Texas, and was the epicenter for commerce. And so having this rail line here between there and say Dallas and other areas to go to meant that Tomball actually was a pretty significant hub back even in the late 1800s. Now, if you come here during certain times of the year, they actually have the caboose you can walk through, as well as you can walk into and through some of the museum here and learn about travel here in Tomball back in the 1800s into the early 1900s. So I moved up onto the platform, and so I could just imagine back in the day all the travelers standing here waiting for their train to roll in, either north or southbound here along the tracks you can still see here. In fact, it looks like they're redoing a bunch of the ties going across the railway here. But you can imagine the trains coming through. In fact, trains looks like still come through this area, although this is no longer a stop for travelers to catch something like a passenger train like Amtrak. And I'll say I'm really enjoying all the sculptures here. Next stop, Tomball, Texas, and this shows a conductor with his watch out, letting folks know the train is coming and they need to get their stuff together and hop on board. And what I really love about this statue is the fact that they have Spike, who is known as the railroad dog. And if anybody has more information on that and can send us some resources, I'd love to learn more about Spike. I always like animal stories. Thank you all for joining me today to learn about Tomball, Texas, or Oil City, USA, and also learn that interesting story about Ripley's, believe it or not, the fact that the individuals there, the town folks, actually got 90 years of water and gas. Now, I don't think they got quite that much out of that deal once all was done and said, but pretty interesting story, and the fact that it made Ripley's, believe it or not, was fascinating to me. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please leave comments down below. Have you been to Tomball, Texas? Do you have some additional history that you can share with all of us down in the comments? We all like to learn together. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. You can hit that bell for notification to keep up on all my latest videos. I pretty much release videos every week on Mondays, and then I have a series of shorts I like to put out there as well. So with that being said, thank you all for joining me today. Take care, and we'll see you all in the next adventure. Bye for now.